It is roughly 6 in the morning in Israel. On a quiet runway, fighter jets begin taking off, one after another, armed with long-range, highly accurate munitions. The flight is long. The target is farther than most people imagine, and the purpose is not to seize territory, or to bomb an airfield, or to send a warning. The purpose is to remove a man who has sat at the very top of Iran's system for decades. But here is the first mystery. In a country built around secrecy, where the supreme leader's schedule is guarded like a state secret, how do you know where he will be? And if you think you know, how do you strike fast enough that he cannot disappear into the network of secure sites built for exactly this kind of moment? Because 2 hours later, in the heart of Tehran, missiles will hit a leadership compound that is not simply symbolic, but functional. It is where the state's nerve endings converge. And in the opening blows of this war, the window is measured not in days, not in hours, but in minutes. And once that window closes, the entire region will learn what retaliation looks like. To understand how this happened, we have to zoom out and then come back in. At precisely 6 a.m., engines spool on a dark Israeli runway. Fighters roll in sequence, each loaded for a mission that will cross the length of the Middle East before breakfast in Tehran. The air crews know the numbers. 2 hours and 5 minutes from takeoff to the moment a leadership compound will be erased from the map. There are no second chances. The target's location is not just a matter of geography, but of minutes, fixed by a narrow alignment of intelligence, routine, and vulnerability. The jets climb, banking east over the Negev, then out across the Gulf of Aqaba. Every minute is calculated. The route threads a corridor over Saudi and Iraqi airspace, each segment coordinated to avoid detection, each waypoint checked against a clock that cannot slip. By 7:30 a.m., the strike group crosses the Zagros foothills. Weapons officers review coordinates one last time. The city ahead is waking, but inside the cockpits, the world is reduced to fuel, altitude, and the digital countdown to impact. The target, a walled compound in central Tehran, is where the supreme leader and his circle are assembled. At 9:38 a.m., the final approach begins. Guidance systems lock. There is no radio chatter. At 9:40 a.m., precision-guided munitions descend through the morning haze. The window closes. In just over 2 hours, the most protected figure in Iran is within reach of foreign pilots, and the question is no longer if the strike will land, but what will follow in its wake. How did that window open? And who, behind layers of secrecy, made it possible? To understand how a daylight strike on Iran's supreme leader became possible, the lens widens across decades of confrontation and a landscape transformed by crisis. Iran's so-called axis of resistance, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen, anchors Tehran's reach from the Mediterranean to the Gulf. Each group receives arms, funding, and guidance from the IRGC's Quds Force, forming a web designed to outlast and outmaneuver conventional military power. Yet by early 2026, this network is under strain. Years of sanctions, triggered by the US withdrawal from the nuclear deal in 2018, have pushed Iran's economy into freefall. Inflation surges past 60%, the rial collapses, and food prices double. In December, Tehran's Grand Bazaar, long a symbol of regime stability, shuts its gates in protest. Merchants chant for the supreme leader's removal. The strike spreads. By January, unrest rattles all 31 provinces. Security forces respond with live fire and a near-total blackout of the internet. Official death counts are disputed, but independent estimates run into the tens of thousands. The regime's legitimacy, once anchored in revolutionary myth and regional defiance, now flickers. The IRGC, charged with both external projection and internal control, faces impossible choices, crack down harder, or risk losing the street. Meanwhile, nuclear diplomacy collapses in Vienna. With the JCPOA dead and breakout time measured in days, Israeli and American leaders see not just a hostile regime, but a system on the brink, armed, cornered, and unpredictable. The question inside Western war rooms is no longer if confrontation is coming, but whether waiting will make it more dangerous. What incentive remains for compromise when every lever, economic, diplomatic, internal, has failed? In this climate, the logic of decapitation moves from unthinkable to urgent. The window for action is defined not just by intelligence, but by the sense that the old rules, deterrence, mutual warning, red lines, no longer hold. Saturday, February 26th. Tehran's elite gather inside the Khomeini Institute compound, an event so rare and so exposed it almost defies years of fortified secrecy. But here's the first mystery. How did foreign planners know, with near certainty, that Iran's supreme leader would be present at a fixed location in daylight with his senior command? The answer lies in a months-long campaign of surveillance, a fusion of human sources, signals intercepts, satellite imaging, and cyber intrusion, each discipline feeding a single question. When exactly does a leader become vulnerable? The CIA operation began far upstream, cultivating a source within the Supreme Leader's inner clerical office. This source, known only as M, relayed fragments, a planned weekend meeting, a shift in elite guard rotations, the arrival of armored convoys. Meanwhile, US and Israeli signals teams picked up a burst of encrypted traffic on the so-called IR Silk Link, a channel reserved for the Supreme Leader's briefings. On February 24th, a short-range radio command, proceed to Sadabad, authorized, was decrypted and matched against satellite images showing unusual vehicle concentrations and new barriers at the compound's northwest gate. Israeli cyber units, working in parallel, exfiltrated a PDF itinerary from the Ministry of Intelligence's internal servers. The document listed Supreme Leader. Sadabad, February 28th. By the morning of the 26th, the Joint Intelligence Center had what it called an intelligence window, a 30-minute block confirmed by live CCTV feeds from inside the lobby, when Khamenei and his circle would be on site. The decision was made. The strike would ride this window. But the next question is not who ordered the strike. It is how the world's most protected figure, in a city blanketed by counterintelligence, became visible, if only for an hour, on the crosshairs of a foreign operation. The strike unfolds in 3 waves, each calibrated to collapse Iran's command structure before a response can form. At 9:40, the first munitions cut through Tehran's morning haze. Israeli F-35I fighters, flying at the edge of their range, deliver stand-in munitions with a circular error of less than 3 meters. The leadership compound is hit almost simultaneously across 3 buildings. No warning, no escape. In the blast, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Ali Shamkhani, Mohammad Pakpour, and Sayyid Abdulrahim Musavi are confirmed dead. The airwaves fill with static as the regime's central nervous system goes silent, but the assault is not finished. Within minutes, a second wave targets the city's air defense network. Israeli F-16I aircraft fire anti-radiation missiles, hunting S-300 and S-400 batteries that ring the capital. Sentinel-1 radar data later shows a sudden blackout in Tehran's air picture. The city's layered shield is blinded just as the third wave forms. Now the operation expands. A joint US and Israeli task force launches over 200 sorties. American B-1 bombers and F-15Es strike missile production sites in Khorasan and Kermanshah. US Navy destroyers in the Gulf unleash Tomahawk salvos on Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' naval assets. 9 ships are destroyed at Mainab and Chabahar, choking off Iran's ability to project force by sea. In the span of 90 minutes, the regime's military architecture is gutted. The choreography is clinical, the sequencing ruthless. What remains is a decapitated command, a shattered deterrent, and a country plunged into uncertainty. The question now, when the smoke clears, who will speak for Iran? Mainab, a name that, in the days after the strike, becomes shorthand for the costs that precision cannot always prevent. At 10:15 a.m., a guided munition lands on a girls' primary school just outside the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps naval base in Mainab, southern Iran. The death toll rises by the hour, 62 confirmed, most of them children and teachers, with dozens more wounded. The school, converted from an old training hall, sits barely 200 meters from the base's perimeter wall. Was it a mistake in targeting, a technical malfunction, or a deliberate gamble in a zone where civilian and military lines blur? Israeli officials deny responsibility, pointing to an intended strike on an underground command post. American statements reference a possible guidance failure in a Tomahawk missile, but offer no direct admission. Satellite images show a fresh crater in the schoolyard, the blast pattern matching a 500-kilogram warhead. Human rights groups call for an independent investigation, but the chain of responsibility remains tangled in classified logs and diplomatic denials. The shock at Mainab does not remain local. Within 24 hours, missiles and drones arc out from Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, targeting oil terminals and airfields in the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman. The material damage is limited, no mass casualties, but the psychological effect is immediate. Gas prices spike 46%. Oil jumps 13%, pushing global markets into panic. Tankers reroute from the Strait of Hormuz, and energy ministers scramble to reassure a jittery world. The question now is not only who bears responsibility for Minab, but how far the aftermath will travel. In the fog of rapid escalation, the line between intended reality and lived reality grows harder to draw. In Tehran, succession remains an unanswered question. Deterrence is recalibrated, but legitimacy hangs in the balance, measured in both power and civilian cost. The deeper mystery persists. Who truly controls the window between secrecy and exposure? Until that shadow lifts, every regime is only as safe as its next breach.